think it's humanity end of the day. I don't think this is any longer cause of India or China or any other country. It's a humanitarian cause now, and one human is coming forward to help another human. I think that's what's happening right now.
Well, let's turn our attention to the African continent. Now we go to West Africa. In Nigeria, the country's Presidential Committee on COVID-19 says it will ban travelers coming from India, Brazil, and Turkey. According to the chairperson of the committee, Abbas Mustafa, the ban will take effect from May the 4th. The move comes due to the rise in concerns about the rampant spread of coronavirus in those countries. Indian hospitals, morgues, and crematoriums are reportedly being overwhelmed. The country has reported more than 300,000 daily cases for more than 10 days straight. Meanwhile, in Brazil, new coronavirus cases have fallen off a late March peak but remain high by historical standards. Total deaths in the country are second only to the United States. Meanwhile, over in Turkey has imposed a nationwide full lockdown lasting until May the 17th. This is to curb a surge in coronavirus infections and deaths there. The country has the world's fourth highest number of cases. Well, to speak to us about what's happening in Nigeria, CGTN's Phil Haza is in Abuja and joins us live now for more. Phil, thank you so much for speaking with us. Phil, we know that there are different countries that have got, whether they're ban lists or restrictions in various countries. Speak to us particularly about what's happening in Nigeria and this decision to ban the travelers coming from India, Brazil, and Turkey.
Thank you, Hannah. Well, if I was just, you took words from my mouth there, because looking at those statistics that you just read out from India, Brazil, and Turkey, the government feels that it's only wise for them to take this decision at this moment. You just read figures where in India, for example, in the past 10 days, they've reported over 300,000 cases on a daily basis. Nigeria at the moment just has about 165,000, roughly more than that. And that's recorded, that's from the first case that was reported in 2020. So that tells you that indeed the government will need to step its efforts up to ensure that the country does not get any of this strain and also worsen the case in Nigeria. The country has been trying to manage its cases with just about 2,000 deaths so far, and if you look at the state of the health sector, the government says it's only wise for them to actually put this ban in place. It means that travelers, for example, Nigerians or permanent residents in Nigeria that are coming from those countries will have to be subjected to 14 days of quarantine in a government facility. But for foreign travelers, those that are not Nigerians, from those countries, they will not be able to get into the country for now. It's because it's a temporal ban until the government sees that the risk of getting such surge of COVID cases from those countries are way, way minimal.
Phil, just speak to us about what else is happening in Nigeria. You have spoken to some of it, but just speak to us about more measures that the government is looking into, and also just the response of people this far into the pandemic.
Well, so at the moment, the government has done quite a number of, put in a lot of efforts in terms of vaccinating its populace. For example, the government says it's done way over 1 million, and it had to pause the vaccination for new people to take their jabs because, the AstraZeneca vaccine is supposed to have 2 jabs. And so the government says until it's done with the first batch of people that have received the vaccines before they can now comment on that aspect. But the government recently has also launched its efforts to get even more vaccines from other parts of the world, like the UK, the Pfizer vaccine. The country's NAFDAC agency just approved that the government can get that. So all of this is just to ensure that the country can still increase its efforts and not relent on its oars so far in managing the virus. Also, that there's the vaccine apathy that the government has been tackling all this while. It has also engaged its primary health care centers to improve its efforts to to sensitize citizens on accepting to take the vaccines. And so these are some of the things the government is doing, and that's why it's saying it's a necessary step, to place this ban for now, to ensure that what the country is faced with, it can deal with it rather than complicate with even more strains or more loads or cases of the coronavirus.
Thank you so much for that, Phil. Philly Hauser speaking to us from Abuja, Nigeria. Well, speaking about vaccinations, let's take a look at what's happening over in the U.S., where more than 100 million Americans have now been fully vaccinated against COVID-19. That surpasses the goal President Joe Biden initially had set for his 100th day in office. But a drop in the vaccination rate has some health experts worried that a large number of people could never get the vaccine. Toby Muse reports from Arlington.
The US has passed the 100 million mark of fully vaccinated people here. That's just under 1/3 of the country's population, and many parts of the country are moving to reopen their local economies. What worries some health experts is that the rate of vaccination is dropping. It was an average daily rate of 2.6 million shots of the vaccine last week, down from a daily high of 3.2 million shots. Health experts say the reason is that those who wanted the vaccine now have got it. And now we're looking at tens of millions of Americans who are more hesitant to get the shot.
What I really worry about is that those people who are already on the fence don't get vaccinated. We don't reach herd immunity come the fall. And then with the winter, because coronaviruses are winter respiratory viruses, we have a big resurgence. Maybe we have variants coming in from other countries.
Targeting this new hesitant population requires a change in approach. Many states had geared vaccination programs towards mass vaccination sites to treat as many as possible in a day. Local authorities in places like Los Angeles, Colorado, Florida, Nevada, and Texas may shut down some of these mass vaccination sites by the end of the month. The new focus is on more targeted outreach to those in two minds about getting the shot. At the same time, we're seeing surges in places like Michigan, Colorado, and Minnesota. A star-studded fundraising concert will take place Sunday in California. Organized by the advocacy group Global Citizen, the concert aims to push people to get vaccinated, but also get vaccines to those in countries where they currently cannot get them. President Joe Biden, along with the UK's Prince Harry and his wife Meghan, will be there. Performances include those by Jennifer Lopez, J Balvin, and others. A Yahoo News YouGov poll showed that the number of those who want to get vaccinated but haven't yet got the shot is running low, just 6% of American adults. But around 4 in 10 Americans are hesitant to get the shot, including a full 20% who say they will never get vaccinated. There has been hesitancy in the Black and Latino communities, but vaccine rates there have been edging higher as programs have encouraged people there to get inoculated. A large group that is stubbornly holding out is white men who support former President Donald Trump. That demographic is more prevalent in the South, where many states are moving to reopen. Let's remember, health experts want to see the US get to a rate of around at least 70% vaccinated for any hope of herd immunity to kick in. Health experts feared that it may end up that it was much easier to get the first 100 million people vaccinated rather than the second 100 million people vaccinated. Toby Muse reporting for CGTN, Arlington, Virginia.
Well, here in Kenya, due to the spread of the third wave of the coronavirus pandemic, hospitals are in dire need of medical oxygen to save the lives of critically ill patients. The country is facing challenges with getting enough oxygen plants. Let's take a look at some of the measures being put into place to meet the growing demand for oxygen.
The demand for oxygen in Kenya has more than doubled to 880 tons a month from 410 tons before the coronavirus pandemic. That's according to the country's health ministry. But production for oxygen has not picked up fast enough to meet the growing demand.
The hospitals are really overwhelmed. We've seen a surge in patients who are really sick. Our healthcare workers are really strained. This shortage is not just for the isolation and treatment centers, but it's shortages across the entire healthcare system, and so it's becoming difficult.
This is Hewa Tele's oxygen production plant. The name means abundant breath in Kiswahili. They currently have 3 oxygen plants in different parts of Kenya, which produce at their full capacity. The company is looking at ways to further scale up production.
We have been working literally 24 hours to try and supply medical oxygen for as many patients as possible. The plan is to expand, increase capacity all across the country, invest in new cylinders, invest in new manpower, trained, skilled people who can be able to handle these plants and ensure that we increase the output of oxygen for the hospitals.
Oxygen is mostly transported in bulky cylinders to hospitals. But Hewatele has found a more efficient and long-term solution to supply medical oxygen.
Oxygen in liquid form is, it can hold very large volume in very small cryogenic vessels, and you can move it over very long distances. So it's an ideal way, especially to cater for hospitals that have very huge demand for oxygen. In Kenya, unfortunately, about 30-35% hospitals have piped oxygen. There's a huge gap in terms of provision of medical oxygen through piping systems. It's a very efficient way of dispensing gas.
The Health Ministry says most of the 70 oxygen plants in Kenya are in repair, with more plants said to be brought back to work and hospitals upgrading their infrastructure to accommodate the distribution of liquid oxygen. The country hopes that health workers will not have to choose which patient to save due to limited oxygen resources. Noktula Shabalala, CGTN.
Well, in more news making headlines this hour, Nigeria in Boko Haram is reported to have killed 8 people there, among them 1 soldier. The attack took place in the northeast of the country. Nigerian media reports that militants ambushed a military base in Borno State. Authorities are yet to ascertain how many other people were injured in that attack. Boko Haram has been operating in the region since 2009, wreaking havoc in West and Central Africa. According to the United Nations Refugee Agency, these terror attacks have spread to neighboring Niger, Chad, and Cameroon, affecting more than 26 million people in that region. Well, let's stay with that story. CGTN's Deji Badmus is standing by for us in Lagos for the latest. Deji, what other developments can you share with us regarding this terror attack in Borno State?
Well, Hannah, information is still not completely out yet. Things are still very sketchy. The military has not responded to the attack. There's been no reaction at all from the military. The government of Borno State too hasn't said anything. What we do know is that that attack actually happened on Sunday, and it happened at a town called Ajiri. Ajiri is about 50 kilometers from the state capital, Maiduguri. And what we understand is that the insurgents actually overran the base and then dislodged the troops there. And of course, what we're getting is that 1 soldier was killed. And something I have to tell you about this town, for a very long time, people had vacated this town. It wasn't until recently that the people were brought back from the various IDP camps around that state, brought back to the town, and unfortunately this incident happened. But of course, as I said, there's been no reaction from the military and no reaction yet from the government. Hannah?
DG, the U.S. and the EU are calling for alternative ways of fighting terrorism and Boko Haram in Nigeria. What more can you tell us, DG, about that proposal and how the government is reacting to it?
Well, to be candid, the proposal is actually nothing new. They're asking for dialogue. They're calling for dialogue. That has always been an option right from time. As a matter of fact, sometime in the past, the government entered some kind of dialogue with Boko Haram, especially the Abubakar Shekau faction. And that was before Boko Haram itself split, before the formation of ISWAP. But I know that that dialogue process eventually collapsed. It didn't work. As a matter of fact, it started from the period of the former president of the country, Goodluck Jonathan. And when the current president came in, he continued with that process. But unfortunately, both sides could not reach an agreement, and so it collapsed. So the government says it is not ruling that out, that it is still committed to dialoguing with the insurgents. Everyone believes that it will be difficult for the Nigerian government to fight its way out of this, that at some point there would be some kind of talks. But Now, how that process is going to go is what no one knows, and who is going to midwife that process, it's difficult to tell at the moment. We know that in the past, the Red Cross and, of course, some other NGOs had actually stepped in, but unfortunately it didn't work. And we also know that the government has a de-radicalization program in place for fighters who had surrenders or what we call repentant Boko Haram members here. There is a de-radicalization program where they are taking through a de-radicalization process. They are also taught trade and all of that, and after some months, they are eventually reintegrated with society. So I don't think it's something new. It's just that now that we're hearing from the EU and the US government, maybe the government would have to resume that process that collapsed in the past and probably intensify efforts on that, because it's becoming very glaring that it will be very difficult for Nigeria to win this war militarily alone.
And Deji, what I would imagine is not new in Nigeria, but this is just an article that I read just recently. It was published yesterday, where the ruling party in Nigeria is urging the opposition in the country to not politicize this issue of security. How do Nigerians who are most affected by this insecurity view this?
Well, the truth is that, look, to some extent, what is going on, the insecurity challenge in the country today has been politicized. There's no doubt about that. And basically what the ruling party did was to call on the opposition party not to politicize it, that politicizing the insecurity challenge would make things quite difficult. But, you know, the irony is that, look, when the opposition was in government, when Goodluck Jonathan was in government, there was something similar as well. It would appear back then, the current ruling party, which was in the opposition then, sort of politicized the process. And so what the opposition party is doing now is essentially what the ruling party did when it was in opposition. But the truth is that politicizing this, of course, would not help the country at all. Everybody knows that, and that everyone is affected. I mean, the banditry going on in the country today does not just affect people in the opposition. It affects everybody, irrespective of their political affiliation. And that is why the government and, of course, the ruling party and some elder statesmen, too, have been making that passionate plea on politicians not to politicize the process, to work together to find a lasting solution to the insecurity challenge. Because, to be candid, Hannah, it appears the challenge we're going through at the moment is to some extent unprecedented. I mean, you have kidnappings, banditry, and what have you, and then you have Boko Haram on the other hand. So the idea is that the more people come together and are able to speak with one voice, the better for this country, and then the quicker we're able to come up with a solution to deal and tackle this problem. Hannah?
A difficult topic we're speaking about, Deji, but it's always good speaking with you. Deji Badma speaking to us from Lagos. Let's move over to Libya, where an estimated 50 migrants are feared dead after their boat capsized in the Mediterranean. There's been an increase in migrant crossings as sea temperatures warm. Over the weekend, at least 800 migrants were rescued by humanitarian organization boats. The EU has faced pressure from humanitarian groups to deploy military vessels for rescue patrols. Tunisia has become a popular point of migration for those looking to cross the Mediterranean. The coastal city of Sfax has witnessed a rise in migrants coming from sub-Saharan Africa. Some were lured by promises of well-paying jobs, and others are looking to cross into Europe. Asetal has more.
The risks associated with crossing from Tunisia to Europe have been well documented. In 2021 alone, 453 migrants so far have died during the perilous crossing. But for some, it remains the only option. Sozo and Inoa are married and remain defiant in their quest to reach Europe.
I want to go back at all costs. There is no danger. Everything is in the hands of God.
I'm looking for a better future for my family, to have, what do you call it, a bright future for the child. Being here, it's not obvious. It's not obvious.
They are among the many sub-Saharan Africans in Tunisia, but not all are looking to cross. Some came to work, while others work odd jobs to save money so they can try to cross again.
When sub-Saharans arrived here, it was not necessarily for the crossing. There are many who came to Tunisia to work, but they were not told the truth. They were promised huge salaries. Some of them even sold their businesses, which were well placed there. When they arrived here, they realized that they had been lied to, so they had no choice.
For Sozo, staying at a job as a cleaning lady is not an option. She and her husband have spent the last 2 years sharing a tiny room with other migrants. With no work permits and calmer seas expected in the summer, her husband is determined to leave Tunisia in hopes of a better future for his children. Astatal, CGTN.
It's a full news day. We'll be bringing you more news making headlines this hour, including in our new series, Surviving Climate Change, we take a closer look at how global warming is taking a toll on the environment. And learning institutions in South Sudan reopen.
Its effects are surreal, but its existence is undeniable. Mother Nature is fighting back against a species that is destroying it.
We're here to raise our voices. We know that climate change has already started and it's killing us.
It hurts. Amid the tears and the grief, however, there is hope for resolution.
We need to live in harmony with nature.
We focus on the deeds, the deals, and the people working to make a difference. This is Surviving Climate Change, only on CGTN.
Well, now onto our series on global warming called Surviving Climate Change. Mankind has long been digging and indeed getting a hole that would be hard to get out of. After years of destruction and unfair treatment, Mother Nature is now fighting back. The result is deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, food shortages, and conflict. In our first episode of Surviving Climate Change, CGTN's Lindy Mtangana sets the pace by unpacking the realities of climate change.
It hurts.
Global warming, climate change, and conservation. Words that are more often said than acted upon by governments and leaders of the world. The truth is, climate change has been brought about by the greed that favors few but affects us all. And not just humans, the entire planet. If wild animals and plants had an enemy, it would probably be us humans. We need only look at the ways in which we've ravaged the earth to understand why. Here's some facts to help put this into perspective. Over the last century, the planet has warmed at a rate of 1 degree Celsius a year. Hard to notice as we go about our day-to-day lives, but over the past 5 years, temperatures have risen at record levels. The whole situation is linked to 3 human activities: the burning of fossil fuels, intensive farming, especially for meat and crop production, and deforestation. Here in Africa, extreme weather patterns are already wreaking havoc in many nations. In 2019 and much of 2020, parts of East and West Africa were hit by floods, leaving a trail of death and destruction. The region is also recovering from 2 devastating cyclones, which resulted in deaths and the displacement of thousands. The cyclones also destroyed crop production, leaving aid agencies to respond to multiple humanitarian crises.
The scars of Cyclone Idai are visible. However, authorities and aid workers believe that they have the cholera outbreak under control.
A desert locust invasion that started in the Horn of Africa has added to the region's woes. Crops that were planted by smallholder farmers have been destroyed by the pests. Meanwhile, weather experts have been predicting a drought on the heels of these floods. It seems when it rains, it pours in Africa. Even sunny spells are no longer normal. They're often searingly hot and accompanied by food and water shortages. This is climate change at play, and it's not just Africa. Asia, the Americas, and Europe have all found themselves at the deep end of climate change. Cyclones, heat waves, fires, and heavy rains are all becoming increasingly common. According to German infographics firm Statista, countries like China, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India are among the world's most polluted. However, countries like Finland, Norway, Sweden, and Estonia are those considered least polluted. Here in Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Egypt are among those whose pollution levels are most worrying. Although there have been efforts to contain the situation, lack of cooperation is seen as the biggest impediment. Some conservationists see climate conferences as little more than talk shops, all heat but no fire.
We're here to raise our voices. We know that climate change has already started and it's killing us.
While grandstanding marks this debate, coral reefs are disappearing and glaciers are melting, leading to rising sea levels. Despite Africa contributing the least to the world's greenhouse gas emissions, the continent is feeling the heat. Food production is being compromised as populations continue to expand. Forests are being cleared to create habitats, which feeds into an already complicated situation. This is conflict. For a long time, the Sahel region was a bedrock of symbiotic coexistence between herders and farmers. Farmers would allow their nomadic brothers and sisters to graze their livestock on their land and fertilize it for the next growing season. But years of unfavorable weather patterns led to cycles of poor harvests. With dwindling food production, a conflict ensued. This is what has been exploited by Al-Qaeda and ISIL to create a potent security threat. This has already claimed a regime in Mali and has influenced election outcomes in countries like Nigeria and Guinea-Bissau. We could list more and more climate change-related cases and incidents. However, this boils down to individuals and governments. Climate change poses a serious threat to the fundamental rights for all. It affects our access to food, to health, and compromises our quality of life for individuals and communities. It is thus our individual, national, and international responsibility to care for nature for us and future generations. The late Nobel laureate Professor Wangari Maathai once said, "Mother Nature is very generous, but also very unforgiving." The reality is, if you destroy nature, nature could destroy you. If we are not careful enough and responsible, this could be practical in our lifetime. It would appear it has already started happening.
Well, for more on issues of climate change, we're now joined by Dr. Richard Munang. He's an environmental and regional climate change coordinator at UNEP, which is based in Nairobi. Thank you so much for joining us, Doctor. Doctor, what is the status of climate change? And by that, I just mean, like, specifically, what do you see different countries around the globe doing to be able to combat the effects that we're seeing of this global warming?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me and discussing this very important subject, climate change. On what countries are doing across the world, let me put in perspective the science, which the World Meteorological Organization, WMO, released a report just a few weeks ago on the state of the global climate change, which shows that the world was actually currently, as we speak today, at 1.2 degrees. That's just 0.3 degrees shy away from the 1.5 degrees where the world actually is supposed to ensure that climate change, we don't go above that temperature to ensure irreversible damages in the planet. And that fits into the United Nations Environment emissions gap report that was released in December last year, which showed that currently the trajectory in which the world is moving, by the end of the century, the world will be above 3.2 degrees. So when you look at the science, it is pointing to the fact that we are heading above the 2 degrees and more so above the 1.5 degree. But what countries are doing across the world? It's eminent in the ratification of the Paris Climate Change Agreement, which was adopted in December 2015. And countries have ratified this, especially the African region, where 52 African countries have actually ratified this, showing that they actually see the inherent and the opportunities when it comes to taking climate action. But that ambition needs to actually be increased to ensure that what the report and the science is telling us is actually something that needs more climate action ambition. Because still in the UNEP emissions gap report that was released in December, it shows that if the world was to focus on what is called the green pandemic recovery and implement actions that lowers emission, but at the same time also drive socioeconomic opportunities, in 9 years from today, the world can be able to cut 25% of emissions and actually ensure that we can limit temperature below 2 degrees.
Doctor, speak to us about how Africa can play a part, or what you're seeing African countries doing, because one of the things that we've heard repeatedly is that while Africa, or our countries on the African continent have some of the lowest emissions in terms of contributing to this climate change, a lot of the countries are the most affected. So what are you seeing African countries do to be able to contribute to that change that you're speaking about?
The continent of Africa is a leader. As I stated earlier, 52 out of the 54 African countries have ratified the Paris Climate Change Agreement. And as we're speaking today, the continent and the entire world is doing what is called revising the national determined contributions, which are actually plans that countries put forward in December 2015. So they are revising this and increasing ambition. And actually, out of the 5 countries that have submitted this revised ambition, 2 of them in the continent have actually put ambitious ambition to be able to drive climate action. So when it comes to policy, Africa is a leader. But what needs to be done is that the policies need to be implemented, and that is where the glaring gap actually exists. So moving forward, countries need to actually start turning those policies and plans into actions, whereby the implementation of climate action become a socio-economic opportunity, where it's not only about reducing emissions, but in addition to reducing emissions, it's also helping to address socio-economic challenges of food insecurity, where we have 257 million people going to bed each and every night hungry, and leveraging on clean energy solutions, which are actually part and parcel of some of these plans called nationally determined contributions, to add value to what is produced. And what is produced should be done in a way that works with nature, not against nature, using what is called ecosystem-based adaptation approaches. Because UNEP's adaptation gap report pointed out that if the world was able to build climate resilience by implementing the green pandemic recovery, leveraging on nature-based solutions like land restoration, the world could actually be able to limit economic damages as a result of climate events, whether we're talking about floods or whether we're talking about storms, limit that by about 1.6%. And if the world was to invest $800 million US, can actually see a return of up to about 16 billion. So when it comes to the African region, implementation, taking into consideration climate action solutions of clean energy, adding value to what is produced, could actually create jobs, especially for the young people, and at the same time lower emissions, but lift people from the bottom of the pyramid. Because let's face it, we are talking post-COVID era, where most of the gains that have actually been accrued over the past 10 years in the continent, climate change is still playing a role. But at the same time, the COVID pandemic has actually weakened and reduced the economic opportunities and gains that have existed in the continent. So leveraging climate action post-COVID pandemic and implementing the solutions that are articulated in the UNEP emissions gap report of the green pandemic recovery.
Dr. Manang, we've run out of time. Thank you so much for that. It was really good having you. Thank you for your input and your insight. Dr. Richard Manang speaking to us, and he's based here in Nairobi. Well, let's head over to South Sudan now, where learning institutions across the country are set to reopen after a year of closure due to the coronavirus pandemic. The Education Ministry has advised schools to provide learners and teachers with hand-washing facilities, sanitizers, and face masks to keep them safe while at school. The government says the country is witnessing a significant decline in the number of infections. Learning institutions in South Sudan closed down in March of last year, but pupils during their last year in primary and secondary schools were allowed to resume classes back in October to prepare for national exams. Well, CGTN's Patrick Oyet is in Juba, and he joins us for that reopening of schools in South Sudan. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us. What's the situation in Juba now, Patrick, that learners are back in school after a year-long break?
Yes, Hannah, it has been actually 1 year and 3 months since the schools were closed. Of course, we've moved to a number of schools this morning, and it is not yet so good. It is not looking very good. Only a few students have reported to school, and that prompted the Minister for Education, who was also moving in the schools, to urge parents and guardians to actually send the students back to school, because the number is very, very small compared to when schools were operating before the lockdown due to COVID-19. And of course, there is also a member of parliament who has raised concern. He has said that in Juba, at least you could see people or children returning to school, but in some of the states across the country, it is very difficult for the learners to return because some of the schools are occupied by soldiers. They are being used as barracks. Also, some schools are being used by internally displaced persons as, you know, places where they are staying now. So learners still don't have where to go. So it's the beginning of a process that will still take some time for all the learners that are expected to go back to school to return, Hannah.
That sounds very challenging, Patrick. But for those schools that are open and those schools that are functioning, what are some of the COVID-19 related health protocols outlined by the government, and how are the schools enforcing those?
Yeah, Hannah, the schools we've moved in Juba here, they have hand washing equipment installed. All the learners are coming wearing face masks, including, of course, the teachers, and then also their hand sanitizers. UNICEF has donated, it says it has donated close to 1 million face masks that is supposed to be distributed across the country in all the schools. And of course, the minister also today said that she expects that everybody should actually wear the face mask, use hand sanitizers, and of course make sure that the level of the COVID-19 in the country remains or reduces, because now the government is saying that only 3% infection rate is what they are recording. So they say if the infection rates go up, then they are likely to go back and close the schools again. So yes, the international community, the UK government, the Canadian, and the rest of the international community, China, they are giving donation that is going to help in the school. So for now, it is looking good because all the protocols are being observed, Hannah.
Thank you so much for that. Some really good news from you, Patrick. Patrick Oyet speaking to us from Juba. Well, let's now take a short break and return your business news, including Egypt's economic reform second phase targets a 7% growth rate by 2026. And Nigeria records rapid growth in digital payment solutions.
It's taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time, it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 48 hours of rain.
Well, let's now take a look at what's happening in the world of business. We begin in Egypt, which has launched its second phase of the economic reform program that it began in 2016. The new stage is aimed at creating jobs, attracting investments, and targets growth rates of over 7% by the fiscal year of 2025-2026. CGTN's Yasser Kim tells us more.
The Egyptian government calls it a program of structural reforms to capitalize on the previous successful IMF-backed economic measures. It will target sustainable growth, make up for the losses incurred by the COVID-19 pandemic, and achieve ambitious growth rates of 7% in 3 years.
Achieving 7% growth rate is based on several indicators, such as the success in containing the effects of the coronavirus pandemic. The government is increasing public investments in different sectors, in housing, infrastructure, agriculture, in manufacturing by building industrial cities, while concentrating on IT technology and exports of goods and commodities to increase hard currency inflows and raise foreign currency reserves.
Influenced by the effects of the coronavirus pandemic, one sector that will see the most growth is healthcare. Public investments will increase by a considerable 205%, opening 23 new hospitals, increasing the capacity of current hospitals, raising the number of intensive care unit beds by 55%, and incubators by 10%. Improving the climate for private sector investments is also on the agenda. But a main priority as well is reducing public debt that has risen sharply to cover the anti-COVID-19 expenses.
The government has been reducing the budget deficit by transforming borrowing policies to long-term, low-interest rate debts. The target is to stabilize the debt levels in the first year and cutting on borrowing in the second and third years of the program.
The last 5 years have seen tough austerity measures and a pandemic that has taken a huge toll on Egyptians. The North African state's prime minister has promised no new burdens on citizens going forward.
There is special emphasis on social safety programs like Takaful, Karama, and Dignified Life to improve the lives of 58 million Egyptians by developing 4,658 villages and 175 municipalities. Work has already started on this. There will be raises in salaries and pensions and improving labor skills through vocational training. The plan is aimed at increasing production. This will strengthen the Egyptian pound, which will reflect on the personal incomes and therefore provide a dignified life to the people.
Implementation of the second phase of the economic program is expected to begin in the new fiscal year from the 1st of July. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Nigeria continues to experience rapid growth in the adoption of digital payment solutions. The nation recorded a 325% increase in the value of e-payment transactions, which rose to more than 1.7 trillion in 2020. And as CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam reports, the outbreak of COVID-19 has accelerated the growth of digital payments in Africa's leading economy.
Olaiwola Fashuba is a home and furniture designer in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. Payment transactions used to be a challenge for him, from sourcing cash for procurements to making bank trips. But now electronic payment is saving him a great deal.
I use e-payments mainly for all my transactions. I use e-payments for comfort. I could be at home and I pay somebody in a different state, so I don't need to walk all the way to meet the person or walk to the bank.
E-payment platforms in Nigeria have continued to flourish. Martin Olajide runs an e-payment gateway known as QuidPay. Many turn to online payment platforms like his at the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic. QuidPay's daily transactions have grown from 12,000 to as much as 50,000. That with an international spread.
We grew 700% during COVID. And if you know the problems to adoption of technology around here, it was always a problem of trust. And because people had choices, I could go somewhere to buy something and present cash. But during COVID, that opportunity was not there. A lot of us were forced to even get our groceries online, And because of that, there was that adoption. And then people's propensity to consume online services increased.
According to statistics from the Nigerian Interbank Settlement System, NIBSS, the value of electronic payment in Nigeria rose from $403.65 billion in 2019 to more than $1.73 trillion in 2020. That's about 325% growth.
It's definitely growing because of the increasing needs of people around pace, around ease of doing business, and because of the increasing adoption of technologies in the way we do things. But beyond that, it's also add that it's equally very important for security checks, for security controls, around it, to be improved, because we see how criminals pervert that process most of the time.
The Central Bank of Nigeria adopted the cashless policy in January of 2012, but it's been plagued with challenges of quality service delivery and cybersecurity gaps that need to be closed. Experts are optimistic that the electronic payment landscape in Nigeria will grow further as Nigerians continue to embrace e-payment as a worthwhile alternative. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Time now for your sport news. Egyptian football giants Al Ahly have set the foundation for a new stadium in Cairo. The Egyptian